Sorry about that. Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Slome. I'm the treasurer of the New York City Bar Association. I'm also a partner of Dyckman. I want to thank Marjorie, just like Sheila did. That we're going to miss her as chair, but I'm very happy to have her as a board member continuing on. This is the financial report for fiscal year ending April 30, 2021. You know I'm going to talk about the pandemic, but first on the bright side, as you all know, COVID restrictions are slowly being lifted in the city and around the country, and the city bar is excited as everybody else about the upcoming new and hopefully COVID-free year. The pandemic was certainly a tough challenge for everyone, including the city bar, but I'm happy to report that the city bar is coming out of it in decent financial shape, and we'll get into that. Our executive director, Brett Parker, who you'll hear from shortly, took steps along with his staff to deal with the pandemic. And I believe from an economic perspective, his efforts to pivot the association almost overnight to a remote delivery of most services like CLE and other educational programs, committee meetings, et cetera, and also the use of online research platforms for members who used to have to come to the building. They made arrangements to have it so that they can do it off-site and from their home. But the pandemic did, of course, have a financial impact. The association's revenues did take a hit due to the pandemic with some of its programs, including meeting services, which I'll explain later, and our CLE programs, which I'll get into in a minute as well. But to deal with increased revenues, Brett and his staff implemented major cost reductions across the board. As Margie mentioned, the association was also able to obtain the indirect benefits from an SBA PPP loan, which was made to our affiliate, not-for-profit, the City Bar Fund. As a result of these efforts, the association has posted what I would term an overall favorable financial result for our past fiscal year. Revenues were approximately 11.5 million. That was down 2.6 million from the previous year's 14.1 million, but expenses were approximately 11.1, and they were down more. They were down 3.7 million from the previous year's 14.8 million. Thus, while COVID caused a major drop in revenue, we were also able to manage that drop with a much larger drop in expenses. And with the revenue exceeding the fiscal year's expenses, we actually had a gain of nearly $400,000. So how were we able to hold our own? In the beginning of COVID, we initially anticipated the full opening of the building last September, but it actually became clear well before that it wouldn't happen, and potentially for an indefinite period of time. The association then took steps to reduce its workforce selectively, particularly with the staff relating to building operations. And when the building closed, we also had a substantial drop in associated costs like utilities. We had a drop in printing costs because by converting to remoteness and digital information for the library, CLE courses, et cetera, paper costs went down, and you'd be surprised. Also food costs, which are a large item, which are associated with our in-person programming and meetings, went down to zero. So revenues were down for a variety of reasons. And the lion's share, as I mentioned before, was due to the loss in revenue from our meeting services division. Meeting services is a division that rents out space in the building for events like conferences, weddings, parties, and film shoots. And for a while there, meeting services income when the building closed went from approximately 2 million the previous year to close to zero. But in the last couple of months of the fiscal year, we were able to bring in a couple of film shoots, which netted $218,000. Other hits in revenue were mainly caused by a lag in dues collections. People weren't going to the office to open their mail and pay their dues. Eventually, we switched to email reminders and things like that. So we're about $733,000 behind where we normally would be. We collect about 8 million in dues a year. And our CLE fees were down. Initially, we had a lot of CLE programs for free during the pandemic, about helping people deal with the pandemic, and we didn't want to charge for them. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that actually one of the divisions was up. Our legal referral services division was actually up $276,000 versus the previous year. Now let's look forward a little bit. We have a proposed budget for the new fiscal year, which is the one ending April 30th, 2022. and it calls for a modest deficit of $40,000, but given the size of our budget, that's essentially break even. We're budgeting back to our more typical 13.8 million or so in revenue against just a tad more than that in expenses. Now, we're not going to see revenue from operations of $13.8 million, but we did in May get a direct SBA PP loan to the association of $1.5 million. And that makes up the gap between what we expect from operations and the $13.8 million. Right now, that's a liability on the books, but we expect that loan to be completely forgiven. While we anticipate expenses increasing, of course, when the building is open, we don't expect them to reach previous year's levels right away, in part because we don't anticipate a full reopening until September. Our fiscal 2022 budget is based on a few assumptions, as you would imagine, and the main ones are that the building will reopen in September 2021, that meeting services, that very important avenue of revenue for the association, will get back to normal. It will probably be a gradual recovery and not start in earnest until at least September, if not a few months after that. But we're looking forward to getting that up and running like it used to be. Staffing will have to increase as we open the building. Probably increases in staff will be mainly, if not completely, with respect to building operations. We also budgeted an average salary increase for this new fiscal year of 5%, along with expected health insurance premium increase of 10%. I will note that raises were not given last year for those earning over $50,000, and for the highest earners, we actually imposed some salary reductions. Finally, the assumptions include that CLE and other programs, as well as committee meetings, will gradually move more and more to live settings in September. Not everything is rosy, and I don't think this is too bad at all, but and to be expected in the pandemic, but our membership numbers are down slightly. After many, many years of steady increase, we had a drop in membership, which we attribute to the pandemic, but our membership numbers do remain strong. Total membership, excluding law students and LLMs, is 23,306, and that's a decrease of 827 members over the prior year. We hope the numbers will rebound this year, and the association is continuing its efforts, if not redoubling its efforts, to increase membership. A bright spot, investments. As anyone who follows the stock market would know, right after the pandemic, stocks took a big dive. But as you also know, stock values came back, and not only did they come back, they increased somewhat dramatically. And at the start of the pandemic, the association's investment committee, which is chaired by John Baumgartner, began monitoring the situation very closely, increasing the frequency of committee meetings with the association's investment consultants. The associations followed our consultants' advice, which, as you wouldn't be surprised, and I'll oversimplify it, is stay diversified, stay the course, and don't try to time the market. Turns out to have been good advice. The association's portfolio increased by 2.8 million over last year, from approximately 13 million as of April 30, 2020 to 15.8 million as of April 30, 2021. And that increase is after the association withdrew $672,000 for operations, which is the association's standard annual practice and is standard practice in the not-for-profit world. Our balance sheet is stronger. The investment gain that I just mentioned, and also the operating gain that we had last year, resulted in an improved balance sheet. Fiscal year-end assets were at approximately 27 million compared to 23 million the year before. Total liabilities were at 13 million compared to 11.75 million last year. In those liabilities, by the way, is 1.56 million of the new May PPP loan, which again, we expect to be fully forgiven. The association has a line of credit, which we always report on. The good news is, even though we still have the line, it's with BNY Mellon. And in the past few years, as long as I've been looking at it, the outstanding loan balance has hovered at a little over $2 million, with the association paying variable interest rates, which have hovered between 2 and 3%. But lately, our affiliate, the City Bar Fund, has had temporary excess cash from our 150th anniversary fundraising drive. Those funds were destined for building improvements, but of course, they're now delayed. As a result, the association was able to borrow approximately $2 million from the City Bar Fund and reduce its line of credit and interest cost to zero. That loan was approved by the boards of both the association and the city bar, and was supported by the fact that the association provides certain professional services to the city bar fund. So let me just wrap up by mentioning a little housekeeping that once our financial audit is complete, possibly the fall, any member will be able to obtain a copy of the association's audited 2021 financial statements from our website, or also by request from the association's Chief Administrative Officer, Tom Halter. Of course, the board and the rest of the leadership are going to continue to monitor the pandemic, and we're going to make any necessary adjustments we need to keep operations going to serve the needs of all of you and all of our members. And that's it. Thank you very much.